The roar of the Black Hawk's blades was the soundtrack to my life, but today it sounded different. Not the routine drone of transport, but a rising howl of anxiety, echoing off the leaden clouds churning over the endless Alaskan frozen expanse. The 6 of us, soldiers of the icebreaker unit, were flying towards the research station Pole 17. The mission seemed standard. Check the facility's status after a week of radio silence. But the silence on the airwaves was too thick, too absolute. Captain Stoltz, our commander, sat across from me. His face, usually as impenetrable as granite, betrayed a slight tension in his tightly clenched jaw. He caught my eye and gave a barely perceptible nod, as if confirming my own bad feelings. I turned my gaze to the window. Below stretched a white hell, tormented by the wind, merging with the horizon in a murky haze. We'd been joking over the radio just an hour ago, typical army banter, trying to cut the pre-deployment jitters for this drop into the kingdom of permafrost. Now, a tense silence hung in the cabin, broken only by the engine drone and the crackle of static in our headsets. The guys in my fire team, Martinez, Doc Simmons, Gibson on heavy weapons, and Chen, our comms specialist, sat in silence, checking their gear. Their movements were honed by years of training, but in their eyes I saw the same unease gnawing at me. Pole 17 was a state-of-the-art complex, packed with the latest equipment. Total radio silence could mean catastrophic equipment failure, or something worse. Something Command preferred not to mention in the briefing, limiting themselves to the dry order. Investigate and report. My specialty is recon, and my gut screamed we weren't flying into a rescue mission, but into the jaws of the unknown. Memories of the last failed mission, of the mistake that cost 2 men under my command their lives, surfaced like unwelcome guests. Guilt, a cold, sticky companion that never left me. I clenched my fists, trying to banish the ghosts of the past. Right now, I needed to focus on the present. The helicopter began its descent, punching through dense snow squalls. The pilots fought hurricane-force crosswinds. The bird tossed like a toy. Below, through breaks in the blizzard, the station's outline appeared. Low domes and antennas jutting from the snow like the bones of some prehistoric beast. Not a light, no sign of life. Everything looked dead, swallowed by the merciless elements. I flipped on my night vision, scanning the perimeter. The greenish world appeared before me in all its deathly beauty. Snowdrifts, piled high by the wind, reached several meters. And then, right at the edge of visibility, something flickered. A large silhouette, moving unnaturally fast for these conditions. Polar bear. Too far to make out details, but the size was impressive. I focused harder. The figure stopped as if scenting the wind, then dissolved into the swirling snow as suddenly as it had appeared. Just a local predator? Maybe. But something about its movement, its very posture, felt wrong. I rubbed my eyes, deciding it was a trick of light and shadow, amplified by my own tension. But the chill that ran down my spine didn't fade. The helicopter banked sharply, preparing to land. The ground rushed up. Ahead lay the white darkness. Landing was a nightmare. The Black Hawk was thrown side to side like a toy boat in a storm. The pilots, seasoned veterans of polar flights, battled the elements, their faces focused, hands steady on the controls, but the beads of sweat gleaming on their temples even in the freezing cabin spoke volumes. The machine hit the icy surface with a jolt so hard my teeth clicked together. The blades were still spinning, kicking up clouds of snow dust, when the side door hissed open. An icy blast hit us in the face. The outside temperature, according to my wrist display, was minus 56 degrees Celsius. That's minus 69 degrees Fahrenheit. The air burned the lungs with every inhale, turning every exhale into a thick cloud of vapor. The wind roared like a wounded beast, trying to rip helmets and body armor off us. Jumping onto the ice, I barely kept my footing. Around us stretched the white wasteland, plunged into the polar twilight. Pole 17 was visible about 100 meters away, several low-slung modules connected by passageways, almost completely buried in snow. Not a single light in the windows, no smoke from ventilation shafts, only dead silence, broken by the howl of the blizzard. We quickly formed a perimeter around the helicopter, peering into the swirling snow. Visibility was maybe 20 yards tops. Stoltz waved to the pilots, signaling we were clear. The engines roared louder, preparing for takeoff, but something was wrong. They strained, but the bird stayed put. The captain contacted the cockpit via internal comms, his face growing even darker. Looked like the landing gear had frozen to the pad or gotten bogged down in the drift ice. This was bad. Very bad. We were trapped here until the pilots could fix it. I activated the thermal imager built into my helmet's tactical visor again. The world turned into shades of blue and green cold, where the rare heat signatures from our bodies and the helicopter's running engine looked like alien blots. I slowly panned my head, scanning the surroundings. Snow, ice, buried station structures, and suddenly, the scanner locked onto something. Directly beneath a thick layer of snow, not far from the helicopter's tail, the device showed a distinct heat signature, irregularly shaped, pulsing, as if something large and alive lay hidden beneath the white blanket. I tensed, staring at the indicated spot. Nothing. Just an ordinary snowdrift, indistinguishable from hundreds around it. Equipment malfunction due to the extreme cold, or geothermal activity, a vent of warm steam from under the ice. But the signature was too localized, too organic. I was about to point it out to Stoltz, but just then, the ground beneath our feet shuddered. Not from the helicopter. This was different. A deep, low rumble coming from somewhere below, accompanied by a slight vibration. The pilots felt it too. Their voices in our headsets turned anxious. They tried to force the engines, to free the bird. The rotors screamed at maximum RPM, kicking up a full-blown whiteout. And at that moment, from the snowdrift my thermal imager had highlighted, with a deafening roar it erupted. The creature burst from its snowy prison with volcanic fury. It was a polar bear, but monstrously distorted. Disproportionately huge, half again as large as any specimen I knew, with lumpy, growth-covered fur of a dirty white. Its eyes burned with an unhealthy yellow fire, and from its maw, full of broken, icicle-like fangs, steam billowed along with a low, guttural growl that froze the blood. But the size wasn't the most terrifying part. Its body seemed stitched together from different parts. One paw thicker than the other, covered in patches of dark fur, and a bony ridge like spines ran down its back. A chimera, a nightmare creature, crawled out of this icy hell. It moved with unnatural speed and grace, ignoring the howling wind and our shouts. Its target was the helicopter. With one monstrous leap, it reached the Black Hawk's tail. There was a deafening shriek of tearing metal. The tail boom and rotor assembly flew off like a broken toy, scattering sparks and debris. The helicopter listed sharply. The engines choked and died. The silence that followed the roar of the blades seemed deafening, broken only by the blizzard's howl and the monster's furious snarl. We spread out instantly, forming a firing circle around the crippled bird. Assault rifle bursts crackled in the frigid air, chipping ice and snow around the creature. The 5.56 rounds bounced off its unnaturally thick hide like pebbles. Gibson opened up with his light machine gun, hosing the monster with lead, but even the heavy slugs seemed only to anger it. The Chimera bear roared in fury and pain, turning towards us, its yellow eyes locking onto me. I saw not bestial rage, but something like reasoned hatred in them. It took a step towards us, and I knew it was about to charge. Stoltz reacted instantly. He snatched his flare gun and fired directly into the monster's face. A bright red flare lit up everything, momentarily blinding us. The bear howled in pain and surprise, shaking its head, backing up a few steps. Taking advantage of the creature's confusion, we intensified our fire. Martinez tossed a couple of frag grenades that detonated near the monster's paws, sending up fountains of snow and ice. The Chimera staggered, retreating further. It gave us one last hateful look, then turned and vanished into the swirling snow with incredible speed, leaving us alone in the frozen wasteland beside our mangled helicopter. For several seconds we stood motionless, breathing heavily, vapor puffing from our mouths in thick clouds. Then Stoltz lowered his weapon. He walked over to the helicopter, inspecting the damage. The tail section was destroyed. Repairs in these conditions were impossible. The pilots climbed out of the cockpit, their faces pale. They understood too. No way back. We were stranded here at Pole 17, face to face with this icy hell and its monstrous inhabitants. The realization settled on our shoulders like a heavy weight, colder than the Arctic wind. Stoltz looked towards the dark maw of the tunnel entrance leading to the station, barely visible through the snow. "Move out!" His gaze was firm, leaving no room for panic or doubt. We had to go forward into the unknown, to where perhaps answers awaited us, or death. The path to the station lay through a long, gut-like tunnel, carved through the ice and reinforced with steel ribs. The entrance was partially blocked by snow, but we managed to clear a path. Inside, semi-darkness and a ringing silence reigned, a stark contrast to the blizzard's roar outside. The only light came from our tack lights, their beams snatching frost-covered cables, pipes, and icy walls from the darkness. The air was stale, smelling of machine oil, ozone, and something else. Something vaguely unsettling, metallic and slightly sweet, like blood. We moved slowly, single file, covering each other. Stoltz led. I brought up the rear, constantly glancing back, expecting another attack from the darkness. Ice crunched underfoot, along with something else. I shone my light down. Scraps of hide. Not bare. Something gray, tough, with flecks of something like chitin, and nearby strange medical tags like those attached to lab animals. But the codes on them were unfamiliar, consisting of Greek letters and numbers. Alpha, beta, gamma. What was happening here? What kind of experiments were they running at this godforsaken station? The guilt from the last operation crept up on me again. Then, too, I had led my men into the unknown, failing to anticipate the ambush. Now the stakes were even higher. We were cut off from the world, and help wasn't coming. I had to be sharper, smarter. I couldn't afford to screw up again. The tunnel curved, descending deeper under the ice. Occasionally, we passed side passages, welded shut or sealed by heavy blast doors. One such door bore deep scratches, as if something huge had tried to claw its way out, or in. We walked in silence, each lost in thought. Doc Simmons kept stopping to examine strange stains on the walls, frozen spatters of dark fluid he couldn't identify without lab analysis. Gibson nervously gripped his LMG, his eyes darting among the shadows. Chen tried to catch any signal on his communicator, but it was useless. The airwaves were dead. Finally, the tunnel widened into a small antechamber before massive steel doors. The motion sensor above them blinked green as we approached. With a soft hiss of pneumatics, the doors slid apart. I raised my rifle, ready for anything. But what we saw made me freeze in place. Beyond the doors lay a huge chamber, dimly lit by emergency lights. Lining the walls were rows of tall cylindrical pods like cryo chambers or stasis pods from sci-fi movies. There were at least 50 of them, and almost all were breached. Not opened normally, but forced, broken from the inside. Thick armored glass was shattered, spider-webbed with cracks and strange melted marks, as if cut by giant claws, heated white-hot. Some pods were twisted, bent outward as unknown creatures had burst from their glass tombs with inhuman strength. The floor was littered with shards and slick with the same dark frozen fluid we'd seen in the tunnel. The doors hissed shut behind us, cutting off our retreat. We were in a hall of broken dreams, and the nightmare was just beginning. The emergency lighting cast long, dancing shadows, turning the chamber with the pods into a surreal theater of horror. The air was heavy, saturated with the same metallic sweet smell, but thicker here, more concentrated. We spread out, moving slowly deeper into the room, weapons ready. I approached one of the broken pods. The thick, reinforced glass wasn't just broken. It was melted through from the inside. The edges of the hole were smooth, fused, with solidified drips of material, as if someone had used incredibly powerful acid or a plasma torch. But the marks went from inside out, and deep grooves left by claws of unimaginable length and sharpness were visible along the edges. Inside the pod were remnants of restraints, torn to shreds and dark, viscous stains on the metal bed. Whatever they had kept in here, it was incredibly strong and furious. Stoltz gestured for us to check all the pods. We moved from one to the next, and the picture repeated. Shattered glass, claw marks, torn restraints. Some pods were empty. Others held only fragments of something. Scraps of gray skin, clumps of coarse fur, shards of strangely shaped bone. Doc Simmons collected a few samples in sterile bags, his face grim. He muttered something under his breath, pointing to one of the intact control panels next to a pod. The display showed Greek letters and numbers, like on those tags in the tunnel. Project Chimera, I read on the scrolling text beneath the code. So the bear outside wasn't some random mutation. It was the result of a deliberate experiment. The chamber led to another corridor, marked with red stripes on the walls and floor. The emergency lights here flickered even more erratically, creating a strobe effect. The entire corridor floor was slick with something viscous, dark red, like thickened blood or serum. It shimmered in our lights, and it almost looked alive. A faint vapor rose from it, despite the surrounding cold. DNA serum? Growth accelerator? I wondered, recalling fragments from the briefing about genetic research at the station. We crossed the red corridor with extreme caution, trying not to step in the pools of viscous goo. The same disturbing smell emanated from it, but amplified tenfold. It made throats raw and eyes water. The corridor ended at a massive blast door labeled cryogenic storage. The door was slightly ajar. Stoltz pushed it open. Inside, it was even colder than outside. Clouds of freezing vapor billowed out to meet us. It was a huge walk-in freezer, lined with shelves full of containers. And in the far corner, huddled between crates, sat a man. He wore a lab coat over a thermal suit, shaking violently, whether from cold or terror. His eyes were wide, raw terror swimming in them. Seeing us, he cried out and tried to scramble deeper into the shadows, but he clearly lacked the strength. Stoltz approached slowly, lowering his weapon, showing we weren't hostile. The man stared at us with a crazed look. It was him, a scientist, a survivor, and maybe the key to unlocking the mystery of Pole 17, We pulled the trembling scientist from the freezer and settled him in a relatively safe corner of the pod chamber. Doc Simmons gave him a thermal blanket and a hot drink from his ration pack. The man calmed slightly, but his eyes remained haunted. He introduced himself, or rather we found his ID card on his lab coat, Dr. Hans Wieger, lead geneticist of the project. He couldn't or wouldn't speak, just shook his head and muttered incoherently, gesturing with a trembling hand toward the broken pods, then the red corridor. Stoltz showed surprising patience. He didn't press or interrogate. Instead, he gestured for me to search Weiger's personal locker, which the scientist indicated with his eyes. Inside, among personal effects, I found a data tablet with a dead battery and a thick notebook filled with handwritten notes. While Chen worked on connecting the tablet to a portable power pack, I started flipping through the notebook by flashlight. The entries were chaotic, full of formulas, diagrams, and fragmented phrases clearly written in a state of extreme agitation or panic. But gradually, a picture began to emerge. Project Chimera. Dynamic hybridization. Overcoming evolutionary barriers. Weiger and his team weren't just trying to splice species. They aimed to create beings capable of adapting and altering their genetic structure on the fly, using some kind of catalyst. They called this catalyst the bio-key, or the cube. According to the drawings, it was a small, cube-shaped artifact covered in complex patterns, radiating energy. Further entries grew increasingly alarming. Weiger wrote about uncontrollable mutations, the subject's growing aggression, about how the cube, it wasn't man-made. It was found in the ice, in an ancient layer millions of years old. Weiger theorized the cube was a legacy of an unknown pre-human civilization or even alien technology, a kind of life programmer. He believed the cube held the key to evolution, but they, in their hubris, had used it like a crude tool, a lockpick, without understanding its true mechanism. The tablet finally powered on. The last opened file was a video recording. Shaky cam footage showed a lab filled with flitting shadows and screams, then a close-up of Weiger himself, his face contorted in terror. He was shouting something about Subject Omega, about how it broke loose, how it was smarter, stronger than they could have imagined, that the cube, it wasn't just a catalyst, but a power source, maybe even a mind controlling the creatures. The recording cut out with static and the sound of shattering glass. Weiger, seeing the footage on the tablet, started shaking even harder and covered his face with his hands. His faith in scientific progress had been crushed by the horrifying reality he himself had helped create. Now he wanted only one thing: to destroy the cube, wipe his creation from the face of the earth. But the fear of what they had unleashed paralyzed him. He was broken, and us, we now knew what we were dealing with, not just mutants, but spawn of an ancient artifact, possibly possessing its own alien intelligence. And somewhere in these icy corridors prowled Subject Omega, the crown jewel of this mad creation. The realization of the disaster's scale weighed heavily on us. Experiments had spiraled out of control, creating not just aggressive mutants, but beings tied to an ancient artifact of unknown nature. And the most dangerous of them, Subject Omega, was loose somewhere nearby. We urgently needed to contact Command, relay the intel, request support, though hope for evac after losing the chopper was almost nil. Stoltz pointed Chen towards a stationary internal comms transmitter mounted on the chamber wall. Outside lines were dead, but maybe the station's internal network might still be operational. Chen approached the console, quickly checked the power emergency backup was on. He started cycling through frequencies, trying to reach the station's main command post or at least any other comms node. The speaker crackled to life with static, Chen worked the channels, fingers flying over the buttons. Silence. Just steady white noise. He tried sending a standard digital distress signal. The transmit indicator flashed green. The signal went out, but there was no response. Chen didn't give up. He switched to voice mode, though there was likely no one to talk to. He keyed the mic and just left the channel open, hoping to catch anything. Several minutes of tense waiting, accompanied only by the hiss of static, and then the interference changed. It deepened, lowered, and a sound pushed through. Not a human voice, not equipment noise. It was a rasp, low, vibrating, full of menace, a sound that made the hair on my neck stand up. It resembled the growl of a large predator, but with metallic, grating undertones. The sound repeated, closer, louder, like something was breathing right into the mic on the other end. Then there was a sharp click, and the speaker fell back into static hiss. We exchanged glances. What was that? Omega? Or something else? Before we could trade speculations, more like anxious looks and gestures, at the far end of the chamber, near the entrance to the red corridor we'd recently crossed, a shadow flickered. Huge white. The Chimera bear. It stood there, unmoving, its yellow eyes gleaming in the semi-darkness, fixed on us. We instinctively raised our weapons, bracing for a fight. But the creature didn't attack. It stood motionless for several seconds, as if listening to something beyond our hearing. Its massive head turned slightly, ears twitching. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the bear turned and silently slipped back into the red corridor, melting into the shadows. It didn't look scared or retreating. More like it had received an order, like it had been recalled. That rasp over the comms, and the bear's departure. Was there a connection? Was someone or something controlling these creatures? And if so, from where? There could only be one answer. The cube. The artifact didn't just empower them, it controlled them. Finding and neutralizing the cube became our top priority. It might be our only chance to survive. After the Chimera bear vanished, the tension in the chamber became almost palpable. It was clear we weren't dealing with just chaotically roaming monsters, but something organized, controlled. And the control center was likely located with their power source, the cube. We had to find the artifact. Viger, still trembling but slightly more coherent after a stim shot from Doc, pointed to one of the terminals that had survived the chaos. He mumbled something about the main data server, access restricted to him and the project director. While Chen fiddled with interfacing our field laptop with the terminal, I went back to Viger's notes and the tablet info, trying to extract more details about Subject Omega. The data fragments painted a terrifying picture. Omega was created last, the crowning achievement of Project Chimera. Its base genetic material came from several predators, wolf, primates, possibly human, but modified directly by the cube's energy. The result exceeded all expectations and nightmares. Hyper-regeneration, allowing it to heal even mortal wounds in seconds. Inhuman strength and speed, but the terrifying part, its intelligence. According to fragmented test logs, Omega demonstrated an aptitude for complex problem-solving, tactical thinking, even manipulation. It wasn't just a beast, it was sentient, and it was angry. Its escape, it seemed, was what triggered the end for Pole 17. Chen finally accessed the server. Files were corrupted, many sectors wiped, but he managed to extract a station schematic and the last security logs. The schematic showed only one sector with elevated power consumption and special containment, the reactor block. Logically, that's likely where the cube was kept, perhaps used as part of the power system, or as an object of study. The last entries in the security log confirmed our worst fears. Reports of containment breach from Sector Omega, multiple alarms from various sections, life support systems shutting down, then silence. The last active log entry was from the reactor block, but it was corrupted and unreadable. The decision was made without words. Stoltz looked at the schematic, then at us. His gaze was resolute. Find the cube. Retrieve it. Deprive the monsters of their power source and possibly their control. If we were lucky, it would stop them. If not, at least we'd have a chance to destroy the artifact and prevent this plague from spreading beyond the station. Viger, hearing our unspoken intentions, or reading them on our faces and actions, shook his head, his eyes filling with terror again. He tried to say something, pointing at the reactor block schematic, then towards the exit. He clearly considered heading there suicide, but we had no choice. Leaving the cube here meant letting Omega and its spawn loose on the world. We checked weapons, ammo, gear. Our path led into the heart of the station, into the Inferno, the reactor block, where Subject Omega was likely waiting for us. The path to the reactor block led through a labyrinth of technical corridors and passages, even darker and more neglected than those we'd seen before. Emergency lighting flickered intermittently here. Red bulbs flashed on and off, plunging us into near-total darkness broken only by our flashlight beams. Shadows danced on the walls, creating illusions of movement where there was none, playing on our already frayed nerves. We moved slowly in a diamond formation, Stoltz and Gibson up front, Martinez and I covering flanks and rear, Doc and Chen with Viger in the center. Viger kept looking around, his breathing ragged. He clearly expected an attack around every corner. The air grew warmer, the thrum of operating machinery audible up ahead. The reactor was close. The walls vibrated with a low-frequency hum. The smell of ozone and something burning intensified. It happened in one of the long, straight corridors where the flashing lights created a particularly disorienting strobe effect. Suddenly, without warning, creatures poured from ventilation grates overhead and from behind stacked crates. They were small, about the size of large dogs, but their appearance was nauseating. Spider-like bodies covered in gray-green chitin, with multiple thin, skittering limbs. They had no distinct heads, just clicking mandibles and several pairs of glowing red eyes. They moved incredibly fast, scurrying along walls and ceilings as easily as the floor, making a vile, chittering sound. Hybrids, spawn of the cube, but clearly a lesser version, possibly created for guarding or scouting. There were at least a dozen. They swarmed us from all sides at once, trying to break our formation. Our reaction was instant. The crackle of automatic fire echoed down the corridor. Flashlight beams darted, snatching the hideous shapes from the darkness. The creatures were fast and agile, but not very durable. Bullets tore through their chitinous carapaces, splattering a dark hemolymph-like fluid. One creature leapt at Martinez, trying to latch onto his throat with its mandibles. He slammed it away with his rifle butt and put a short burst into it point blank. Another tried to sneak up on Viger, but I caught it in my peripheral vision and cut it down. Gibson laid down, suppressing fire at the far end of the corridor, keeping reinforcements back. The fight was short, brutal, and messy. 30 seconds later, it was over. The corridor was littered with twitching remains, the air filled with the acrid stench of their innards. We quickly checked each other. Scratches, a couple of torn gear elements, but no serious injuries. Even Viger was just shaken. But this skirmish was just a prelude, a warm-up for the main event. We moved on silently, towards the source of heat and humming, towards the reactor, towards the cube, and towards Omega. The shadow play gave way to the anticipation of a bloody premiere. The massive lead-lined doors to the reactor block groaned open with a heavy screech after Chen bypassed the locking system using Viger's access codes. Beyond them lay a vast humming chamber, bathed in the pulsating red glow of emergency systems and radiating heat. The air was hot and dry, thick with the smell of ozone and superheated metal. In the center of the chamber stood the reactor itself, a complex structure of intertwined pipes, cables, and cooling circuits, pulsating with energy. And directly beneath it, in a specially constructed chamber of thick armored glass, surrounded by a shimmering force field, was the cube. It was no bigger than a human head, perfectly cubical. Its surface was etched with intricate shifting patterns that seemed alive. It didn't just glow, it pulsed with a deep crimson light, in time with the low-frequency hum that filled the chamber and seemed to penetrate bone. A palpable wave of strange alien energy radiated from it, causing faint nausea and a tingling on the skin. This was the monster's power source, the key to their existence. And it was right in front of us. Viger stared at the cube with a mixture of horror and awe. His lips moved silently. Stoltz, however, wasted no time on contemplation. He quickly assessed the situation. The cube's chamber was clearly designed for containment and study, not easy removal. The force field shimmered steadily, and there were no obvious external controls nearby. Plan B. His look was eloquent. While Chen and Viger tried to find a way to disable the force field via the nearest control terminal, Stoltz pulled a standard C4 demolition charge with a remote detonator from his pack. He quickly and methodically affixed it to the outer wall of the chamber, directly opposite the cube. His movements were precise and economical, like a surgeon's. If we couldn't take the cube, we'd destroy it, right here, along with the reactor if necessary. It was a desperate move, one that could bury us all under tons of ice and concrete. But the alternative, letting this power escape, was unacceptable. I took up position by the entrance, covering the group while they worked. Gibson and Martinez watched the other approaches to the chamber. The heat and hum were oppressive. The cube's crimson glow was hypnotic yet deeply unsettling. The very air in the chamber felt charged with anticipation. Chen typed rapidly at the terminal keyboard, Viger pointing out lines of code, their faces lit by the monitor's glow. Indicators on the force field control panel began to flash, changing from green to yellow. Looked like they were getting somewhere. The force field around the cube flickered more intensely, becoming unstable. Just a little longer, and the barrier would fall. We could retrieve the artifact. And that's precisely when everything went wrong. From a ventilation shaft above the entrance came a deafening roar, and IIT dropped to the floor in front of us. Subject Omega. And it was far more terrifying than Viger's descriptions. It was huge. Almost 10 feet of pure muscular nightmare, covered in dark, glistening fur through which gray, rubbery skin was visible. Its build was a grotesque fusion of wolf and gorilla, powerful arms ending in long, black claws capable of tearing steel, massive shoulders, but a relatively lean torso and strong, slightly stooped legs that allowed it to move on 2 or 4 limbs with equal speed. The head was lupine, but with an unnaturally high forehead and disturbingly intelligent eyes burning with red fire. Viscous saliva dripped from its maw, full of razor-sharp fangs. It didn't just growl. It emitted a low, vibrating sound that seemed to resonate with the cube's hum. This was Subject Omega, the alpha predator, the apex of the mad experiment, and it had come for its power source. We opened fire simultaneously, instinctively. The chamber filled with the roar of gunfire. Bullets hammered against the monster's body. But Omega barely seemed to notice. It moved with incredible speed, dodging the heaviest bursts, its movements fluid and deadly. Minor wounds on its body sealed themselves right before our eyes, smoking and regenerating with frightening speed. In a single bound, it was next to Gibson, and with a blow from its monstrous paw, swatted the machine gunner against the wall. There was a sickening crunch of bone and the thud of a body hitting concrete. Gibson didn't move. Martinez tried to stop Omega with a grenade, but it knocked it aside mid-air, sending it toward one of the generators powering the cube's force field. Explosion. A blinding flash, a shower of sparks and debris. The generator disintegrated. The red emergency lights flashed more frantically. Then the chamber plunged into semi-darkness. The main lights in the cube's force field died. Only the dim backup lights and the crimson glow of the now unshielded artifact remained. Chaos. In the semi-darkness, Omega was even deadlier. It moved like a shadow, its red eyes gleaming in the gloom. Vigor, standing closest to the terminal, froze in terror, unable to move, his face a mask of primal fear. Omega, as if sensing his weakness or recognizing its creator, turned and covered the distance to the scientist in one monstrous leap. Vigor's scream was cut short by a wet, tearing sound. Omega tore him apart with chilling ease, without even breaking stride. Blood and gore splattered the control console. Chen and Doc fired their sidearms trying to distract the monster, but the bullets merely ricocheted off its hide. Omega turned towards them, its maw stained with Vigor's blood. It swiped with a paw, swatting both soldiers aside like bowling pins. Their bodies slammed against the wall, lifeless. It all happened in seconds. We were losing people one after another, unable to stand against this invulnerable killing machine. Fear clamped an icy hand around my throat. 3 of us left. Me, Stoltz, and Martinez, who was struggling to get up, clutching his side, clearly badly wounded. The reactor chamber had become a slaughterhouse. The crimson light of the cube, resting on its pedestal now free of the force field, illuminated the scene of carnage, casting bloody highlights on the bodies of our fallen comrades. Omega, having dealt with Chen and Doc, slowly turned towards us. Its red eyes burned with triumph and anticipation. It knew we were trapped. Knew we were doomed. It took a step towards the cube, clearly intending to claim its prize. Stoltz reacted first. He didn't run from the monster, but lunged not towards safety, but towards the pedestal where the C4 charge was still fixed. The detonator was in his hand. If Omega couldn't be killed, at least destroy its power source. It was our only desperate chance. Calder Martinez suppressing fire. His voice cut through the din. Martinez and I opened fire, pouring lead into the monster, trying to distract it, by Stoltz's precious seconds. Omega roared in fury. Bullets hammered its hide again, but it didn't stop. It saw the threat in Stoltz's actions. The monster leaped, ignoring our shots, straight at the captain. Stoltz managed to raise the detonator, his finger finding the button. But Omega was faster. A monstrous paw crashed down on Stoltz, crushing his body armor and the man beneath it. The captain fell. The detonator flew from his grasp, skittering away. Omega stepped on Stoltz's lifeless body, letting out a triumphant roar, and turned towards us. Martinez, gathering his last strength, fired again, but his rifle just clicked. Empty. Omega turned and ended the life of my last squad mate with a single blow. Now I was alone. Alone against the invulnerable monster. Omega moved slowly towards me, its red eyes gleaming in the dim light. I backed away, fumbling to reload my rifle, but knew it was useless. It was toying with me. Suddenly there was an explosion. Not as powerful as the C4 would have been, but enough to shake the chamber. The damaged generator or some other piece of equipment must have finally given out from overheating or a short circuit. The shockwave knocked me off my feet, extinguished some of the remaining emergency lights, and kicked up a cloud of dust and smoke. Omega staggered from the unexpected blast. And in that moment of chaos, when visibility dropped to near zero and the monster was momentarily distracted, I saw it. My chance. A ventilation grate near the floor, damaged by the blast, leading into the darkness of a shaft. Without a second's hesitation, driven by pure survival instinct, I dove into the narrow opening. The metal edge caught my shoulder painfully, but I squeezed inside, into the saving darkness. Behind me, I heard Omega's roar as it presumably realized I'd escaped, then the sound of footsteps moving away, towards the pedestal with the cube. It didn't pursue me. It had a more important goal. The cube, and I was left alone, buried alive in the dying station, but alive, miraculously survived. Again. The ventilation shaft was my salvation and my prison. A narrow, dark, dusty space smelling of metal and smoke. I crawled, pushing with elbows and knees, feeling the ache in my injured arm and the sting of numerous bruises. Behind me, in the reactor chamber, flames roared and structures collapsed. The secondary explosion, while not destroying the cube, had accelerated the station's demise. The station was dying. The shaft ceiling above vibrated. Dust and small debris rained down. I was buried alive in these icy corridors, and the only way was forward, into the unknown. The cold metal burned my skin through tears in my thermal suit. Every meter was a struggle. Pain throbbed in my head, mixed with images of my dead comrades, Gibson, Viger, Chen, Doc, Martinez, Stoltz. All dead. And I survived. Hid like a rat while Omega killed them. The guilt wasn't cold and sticky like before, but burning, caustic. But I couldn't give in to it now. Had to keep moving, find a way out. If only so their deaths wouldn't be in vain. So I could tell the story. Somewhere ahead, from the depths of the ventilation system, a roar echoed. Low, guttural, full of primal power. The Chimera bear. It was somewhere in this maze of ducts, too. Maybe looking for an exit. Or me. I froze, listening. The roar came again, but seemed further away. It wasn't coming towards me. I continued crawling, trying to be as quiet as possible. The shaft branched. I chose paths at random, following the faint airflow, hoping it would lead me to the surface or a less damaged part of the station. The heat from the reactor fire was palpable even here. The vent metal was warm. The station groaned and creaked like a wounded whale beached on the shore. The ice outside pressed in on the damaged structures, and I feared the whole complex would collapse at any moment, burying me under tons of ice and steel. I crawled, losing track of time. Minutes blurred into hours. My body ached with fatigue and pain. But I kept moving, driven by self-preservation and a sense of duty to my fallen team. I had to get out. Had to tell the world what happened at Pole 17. About the cube. About Omega. About the threat that was now loose. Ahead, a faint light glimmered. Not the fire's glow, but a dim, grayish light filtering through a grate. I crawled closer. It was a ventilation grate opening into some large hangar or storage area. And what I saw through the bars made me freeze, holding my breath. Through the dust and frost-covered grate, I looked down into a huge transport hangar. Through a breach in the far wall leading directly outside into the icy night, the shimmering green-violet curtain of the aurora borealis was visible. And in the center of the hangar they were gathered. The pride. The thought flashed through my mind. In the center, towering over the others, stood Omega. In its paw rested the cube, pulsing with a steady crimson light that cast sinister reflections on the figures around it. Beside it, Like a loyal guardian, stood the Chimera bear, its yellow eyes scanning the hangar. And milling around them were other creatures. A few surviving spider-like drones from the corridor, and a couple of others I hadn't seen before. Low-slung things, like a reptile-canine hybrid, with smooth, dark skin and rows of sharp teeth. They were all looking at Omega, or rather, at the cube in its paw. The cube pulsed, and with each pulse, the crimson light grew brighter, more intense. It seemed to emit not just light, but some silent signal, a command. The monsters stood motionless, as if hypnotized, receiving this signal. There was no growling, no chaotic movement. Just an eerie, organized silence filled with anticipation. Omega slowly raised the paw holding the cube. The crimson glow washed over the monsters, and they seemed to shudder in unison. Then Omega turned towards the breach in the wall leading outside. It took a few steps, and the other creatures followed, moving in concert like a single organism. The Chimera bear walked beside Omega, the others slightly behind. They weren't moving like beasts fleeing a destroyed lair. They were leaving with purpose, as if following orders from the unknown power within or behind the cube. Where were they going? What were they planning to do with that monstrous power? I had no answers. I was just a witness, trapped in my metal cage, watching as the nightmare born in the depths of this station walked out into the freedom of the vast white darkness of the Arctic night. I watched the last monster disappear through the breach, and the hangar emptied, leaving only shadows and the booming echoes of the dying station. They were gone, but I knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. When the last echo of the monster's footsteps faded through the hangar breach, I allowed myself to exhale. The hangar was empty, save for debris and the dancing shadows from the distant fire. The flames from the reactor block continued to consume the station, but they hadn't reached here yet. I needed to get out, fast. I felt for the grate's fasteners. They gave way. The explosions and general structural warping had weakened them. Gathering my remaining strength, I kicked the grate out and dropped to the cold concrete floor. The fall sent jolts of pain through my injured arm and battered legs, but adrenaline drove me forward. I crossed the hangar, heading for the breach in the wall. The air here was cleaner, frigid, smelling of snow and the ozone tang of the aurora. Outside, the polar night raged. The blizzard had eased slightly, and the sky had cleared, revealing a fantastical spectacle. Vast ribbons of green, violet, and white aurora danced over the icy wasteland, bathing everything in an unearthly, ghostly light. Pole 17 behind me looked like a wounded beast, spewing smoke and fire into the cold sky. It was doomed. I looked around, trying to get my bearings. The monster's tracks led south, disappearing into the snowy gloom. They had gone into the ice, taking the cube with them, taking a threat of planetary scale. And then my gaze fell on a dark, twisted mass of metal sticking out of a snowdrift near the station's ruined perimeter. Our Black Hawk. Or what was left of it after the Chimera bear's attack. The tail boom was gone, blades mangled, the cockpit. God, the cockpit was savaged. I stumbled closer, my legs sinking into deep snow. Around the helo, old half-buried tracks were visible, the massive paw prints of the Chimera and frozen patches of dark fluid. The thick armored glass of the cockpit wasn't just broken, it was torn open like a tin can. I looked inside. What I saw made my stomach clench into an icy knot. The pilots were still inside. Their bodies, coated in ice and frozen blood, were literally pressed into the seats, but not from impact. Their flight suits were shredded, revealing horrific wounds, marks of giant claws and fangs. One was nearly decapitated, the other's chest cavity ripped open. The instrument panel and cockpit lining were splattered with blood, and scored with deep scratches. The creature, most likely the Chimera bear, hadn't just disabled the helicopter. It had gotten to the pilots, gotten in and butchered them right in the cockpit while we were fighting it off outside. They'd been helpless, trapped in their metal cage. 2 more deaths, brutal, agonizing. And again, I'd been nearby, but unable to help. I was alone. The last survivor of Icebreaker Squad, the last witness to the bloodbath at Pole 17. The guilt for my fallen comrades, for the pilots for hiding while Omega killed the others, choked me. But cutting through the guilt was a cold, fierce resolve. I would survive. I would report. I would do everything I could to stop the plague that had vanished into the ice with the crimson cube in its grasp. I had to. For Stoltz, for Martinez, Gibson, Chen, Doc, Viger, for these butchered pilots. I backed away from the wrecked helicopter, feeling the cold seep into my bones. I fumbled for the emergency beacon on my belt. My hands trembled so badly from cold and exhaustion I could barely press the activation button. A red light began to blink against the white snow and green sky, a faint signal of hope in this boundless kingdom of death. Having done that, I felt my strength finally give out. My legs buckled. I dropped to my knees, then collapsed face first into the snow. My vision swam. The last thing I saw before consciousness fled was the indifferent, cold shimmer of the aurora borealis overhead, and the mangled silhouette of our helicopter, a tomb for its crew. The white darkness swallowed me, swallowed. 72 hours later, a rescue helicopter located the wreckage of Icebreaker Squad's Black Hawk, half buried in snow near the ruins of Pole 17. The station itself was a burned-out, twisted mass of metal and concrete, slowly sinking into the ice. There were no signs of life. The bodies of the 6 squad members and several station personnel were found inside the devastated complex. Sergeant Nicholas Calder was not among them. His emergency beacon was found activated near the main breach in the hangar wall, but the sergeant himself, and any sign of his further movement, could not be located. The official report stated, "Killed in action, body not recovered due to extreme weather conditions and facility destruction." A week later, during a territorial flyover using a drone equipped with advanced ground-penetrating radar and thermal imaging, the operator noticed a strange anomaly. Deep beneath the ice, several dozen miles south of the ruined station, instruments detected a powerful, pulsating energy source of unknown origin, emitting a faint crimson glow. The drone descended for a closer scan. The thermal camera, peering through the ice and snow, picked out a moving silhouette from the darkness below. A tall, distorted figure trudging through the frozen wasteland. In its raised paw, a cubic object was clearly visible, glowing brightly on the thermal display. The silhouette stopped, raised its head, and looked directly up at the drone's lens, as if it knew it was being watched. Its eyes burned as 2 bright points on the thermal scan. It was Omega, and it carried the cube, carrying it toward a new, unknown destination. The white darkness held its secrets, and the most terrifying of them was just beginning its journey.